Now living in Albany. He's the chair of the Healthcare for All Oregon Faith Caucus and the president of the Veterans for Peace Linus Pauling chapter in the Mid-Valley region. His current chief passion is working for justice in Palestine and Israel in a variety of ways. Thank you so much for being here.
Can everybody hear me? Well, thanks for inviting me, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't know if I can top what the choir just said. Maybe I can elaborate on it just a little bit. We live in a uniquely dangerous time. Although most of us try not to think about it, for the first time in history, humanity is facing two existential threats at the same time. Neither is hypothetical, and neither concerns events in the distant future. Both are imminent threats to our collective survival. We have to face them now if we are in them. Nearly every day we see in the news the growing devastation of the climate crisis. We just saw it in Spain. How many of us recognize the irony, though, that this threat is exacerbated by the endless wars fought primarily to control access to fossil fuels? In the process, these wars generate enormous quantities of greenhouse gases. If the U.S. military was a country, it would emit more greenhouse gases than all but 42 of the others. All to protect a system that keeps us addicted to the very fossil fuels that are now threatening our existence. We can't address the climate crisis unless governments learn to cooperate. That won't happen unless U.S. citizens stand together to oppose their government's constant push to expand America's global empire through endless war. Thank you. The second existential threat is related to the first. Because of the U.S. push towards global dominance, the threat of nuclear war is growing rapidly. The danger is at its highest level since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, which some of us here can remember. In January of last year, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists moved the hands of the doomsday clock to 90 seconds to midnight. Things have gotten much more dire since then. The U.S. is currently challenging nuclear powers in Ukraine, China, and North Korea, and it's supporting a nuclear power in the Mideast that is acting in a dangerously reckless manner. In case you missed it in the blur of the 24-hour news cycle, the International Court of Justice ruled in January that there is a plausible case that Israel is committing genocide. Since then, the court has issued several orders for Israel to stop indiscriminately bombing civilians and allow in food and medical aid to the victims. These orders have been ignored. The indiscriminate violence continues in both Gaza and the West Bank, and now it has spread to Lebanon. The siege of Gaza has tightened to the point where the entire population of the north today is facing imminent starvation. Our media is guilty of facilitating this genocide and other U.S.-backed carnage around the world. Acting as stenographers for a government that has been repeatedly caught lying us into war, it routinely continues to mislead us on foreign policy. The mainstream media consistently promotes a biased narrative that makes war seem necessary and sometimes even noble. It's not. War is always a choice. And it's never noble. It represents a failure of governments to use diplomacy to prevent conflict. There can be no such thing as a just war when a government has abandoned diplomacy. Think of it. The money wasted on supporting global conflicts could be used to confront the climate crisis if humanity and the planet were the highest priorities of our leaders. It could also transform our dysfunctional healthcare system. That would ultimately save money, so why aren't we doing it? Do I need to say why? The answer, of course, is that we're cut into Wall Street profits, just as ending the lucrative war industry would do. Now, Wall Street's enormous power over Congress is the result of the Supreme Court saying in its infinite wisdom that spending money to influence elections is constitutionally protected speech, even when it's spent to buy politicians. It will take a constitutional amendment to reverse this. As hard as that seems, it's the only way that we can undercut the power of amoral individuals and corporations that generate profit from human misery in so many ways. So, faced with a powerful system that seems designed to exploit average citizens in the U.S. and around the world, a system that's threatening our collective survival, how have most of us reacted? Well, it's said that when faced with threats, animals choose between fight or flight. Unfortunately, in the face of these seemingly insurmountable existential threats, most of us have made a third choice. To avoid being overwhelmed by thinking about these terrifying realities, most people minimize or deny the dangers altogether. Even those who don't prefer to distract themselves with more pleasant things most of the time. This isn't a moral failure. It's psychological self-protection. We feel powerless, right? We tell ourselves our actions won't change anything, so we do nothing. We have to challenge the assumption of our helplessness. If we choose to submit to hopelessness, we abandon ourselves and our children to a system that cares so little about us that it's now threatening survival of life on Earth. I regret having to come here and deliver such a depressing message. I guess I didn't have to. But I wanted to make it clear that I'm not here just to give an interesting talk. I'm hoping to inspire action. And I believe there is reason for that, because we're not helpless. The story of the Good Samaritan suggests what we can do that might alter our fate. How many of us know the story of the Good Samaritan? Okay, well, here's the test. The story begins with Jesus walking toward Jerusalem for the last time. And he comes across a lawyer, an expert in Jewish law, who stops him and says, "Rabbi, how will I attain eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Well, you're the expert, tell me." And he says, "Well, love thy God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said, "You got it. Do that, and you will live." So the lawyer was trying to show off to his friend, and he says, "Well, tell us, Rabbi, who is our neighbor?" And so that's why Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. And that story goes, a man was walking down the road when he was accosted by robbers and beaten almost to death. He was left to die on the side of the road. Now, coming up the other way towards him was a priest, and he saw the man by the road, and he grabbed the hem of his gown and carefully walked around him so he wouldn't get bloody. A little bit later, a Levite, another church functionary, came by and did the same thing. So finally, here comes the Samaritan. Now, Samaritans were people that were despised by the Judean Jews. They weren't considered real Jews. And so the Samaritan sees this man, and all he sees is an injured man. So he stops, he pours wine on his wounds, he binds his wounds, he picks him up, wraps him in his own blanket, puts him on his own donkey, takes him to an inn, pays for his dinner, and then leaves 2 days' pay with the innkeeper to watch him while he convalesces until he can come back and check on him again. Wow, isn't that something? So Jesus turns to the lawyer and he says, "So who is the neighbor? Who is being the neighbor?" And the lawyer said, "Why, the one who showed mercy." Jesus said, "Right, go and do likewise." Well, it seems like a pretty obvious message, right? But actually there are quite a few messages in there, and most people just take it to mean, well, if you see somebody hurting, you should help. But there's more to it than that, so let's look at it a little more deeply. First, it's worth noting that the Golden Rule was not a new idea in Jesus' time. It was already part of Jewish law. That's why the Pharisee knew it. And that isn't hard to understand because compassion is in our nature. Now, sometimes it's hard to remember that because it doesn't seem that evident in American society these days. A lot of people say individualism is what defines us. What a crazy idea. If that's what being American is, I want to be an American. Our task then is to awaken the latent compassion that is in all of us and those who have come to accept avoidable suffering as normal and natural. The next observation is that in saying we are to love God and our neighbor, the Pharisee makes clear that both are necessary to earn God's favor. One shows their love for God by loving their neighbor. Okay. Everybody with me? I'm really one. So the next lesson is that following the golden rule means showing mercy to everyone we meet. Now, from this story, you can tell that mercy is not just compassion, which is great, but the priest and the Levite might have felt pity as they walked by. That's a form of compassion. But they didn't stop, did they? The Samaritans showed mercy by stopping and helping. Now, the main purpose of Jesus telling the parable, as I said, was to make the point that everyone is our neighbor. And loving your neighbor means caring enough about them to help when they're in need. The parable makes clear that love, in the universal sense, is not a feeling. You don't have to have positive feelings, towards someone to respect them, to have compassion for them, and to want to relieve their suffering when they're in pain. The Samaritan probably wasn't having real positive feelings about the person who presumably would have thought him to be less than him. But love is not merely a belief either. It's a predisposition to helping those in need. Love is a verb in this sense, not a noun. Love is an action word. It's important to love even those who see us as their enemies because of our beliefs. How can we hope to overcome a powerful system that oppresses us all if we won't even talk to our neighbors who don't see the world as we do? Humanity has to develop the capacity to act out of universal love if we're going to save ourselves. And I should say, individuals have to do that, and hopefully we'll be an example to others. The story of the Good Samaritan holds one more lesson, and one that's critical to understand in these times. Consider this. What if the traveler had been the victim of a heart attack? Could a passerby care for him? Probably not. They didn't know CPR in that time. You couldn't call an ambulance. What they would have needed was a healthcare system that could help anyone in medical need, just like the Good Samaritan did. We could have such a system here and now if enough of us were willing to speak out about the injustice of our current system. So here's the point. If everyone is our neighbor, it's the duty of Good Samaritans to try and help even those who are not in front of us. If we want to be like the Good Samaritan, we must help victims of an unjust system by confronting injustice wherever it exists. To paraphrase Dr. King, our fates are so intertwined that tolerating injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that threat is now existential. So achieving justice requires speaking truth to power. That's what prophets do. Note that I say do, not did. We can all be prophets. And we need a metaphorical army of prophets in these times. Anyone can choose to volunteer for this army. We can no longer allow ourselves to be divided against one another. Neighbor has been set against neighbor by our oppressors so that we do not unite against them. At this critical time, we must come together to abolish a system that threatens the future of humanity. So, how can this understanding of the story of the Good Samaritan change things? I hope. First, when we love everyone equally, we shift from blame and demonization to focusing on the problem and the solution. And as a family therapist, I know from experience that this is the only way a dysfunctional family system stuck in a self-reinforcing cycle of suffering can be changed. With our unjust system now placing our human family in imminent peril, we can't be distracted from finding a solution to the problem by focusing on assigning blame. And I think we need to remember that on November 6th. Second, the story of the Good Samaritan reminds us of our duty to act to promote the common good. Anything we can do to promote justice advances the cause. By breaking down the barriers between us through showing love for all our neighbors, we open hearts and minds to the fact that we must address these common threats together for the sake of everyone. In creating a culture of caring, we promote the unity that will enable us to challenge our corrupt system, an unjust system. Our most dangerous enemies are cynicism and fatalism. This is a struggle we cannot sit out. We must adopt the attitude that we cannot quit if things get tough. That's the attitude of soldiers who resolutely carry on their mission regardless of the odds of victory, because the consequences of surrender are unacceptable. We must become soldiers for peace. Now, it may be strange, it may sound strange, to use a military analogy when talking about how to achieve peace, but I believe we will need a virtual army of people willing to devote themselves to the mission of changing our self-destructive course. If we're to save humanity, we must commit to addressing injustice in our communities, in our nations, and in the world at large. To know peace, we must know justice. Now, you may be asking yourself, what specifically can I do to change such a powerful system? Well, there are many tactics, there are many problems that need to be addressed in order for us to succeed. And each of us can decide for ourselves how best to serve the cause, but there are some things we can all do. First, it's essential to keep in mind that those who want to control us can only do so by dividing us. We can't let them. That's why we must learn to truly love everyone. A soldier for peace leaves no person behind to suffer in solitude. We live in a culture where people are so isolated that half of them don't have a single person with whom they feel comfortable discussing a personal problem. How many of you are aware of it? And it's getting worse. Our mission is to counter this by intentionally cultivating a culture of caring. The first step is to practice thinking of everyone as a family member. Even when we find a family member's beliefs or actions repellent, most of us will try to respect and love and have compassion for them as fellow humans and family members. One way to do this is to practice looking for something you love in each person that you encounter. Something that connects you to them by virtue of your belief in our common humanity. When we can't find that connection in someone, the fault may not be our own. It may be that that person is in special need of compassion because they're not allowing themselves to experience their full humanity. You may think of them as inhuman, but they still have that. It's just buried. In loving them anyway, we model humanity for them, and by doing so, we may awaken their own in them. Above all, avoid thinking of people as members of any group smaller than humanity itself. When we learn to love everyone, it makes no sense to label one side in a conflict evil and the other good. Not even when one side is causing most of the suffering. For instance, both Jewish Israelis and Palestinians deserve our love by virtue of their humanity. While we have a duty to take action to stop a genocide, we must do so in a spirit of love. That is the only way to find permanent peace, which is imperative if we're ever to achieve peace on a global scale and in the process save the planet, or at least life on it. The brutality of Israel's actions has finally sparked a global demand for justice. It's lit a flame in the hearts of millions around the world. It's up to us to use the light of that flame to find our way to safety in a world on the brink of self-destruction. We cannot let that flame die out, and we cannot let it burn so hot that it will consume us in our anger. We must let love guide us, for we are engaged in a battle not only for the survival of humanity, but for its soul. As in any battle, there's no guarantee of victory. If it requires any war to save humanity, we must choose to believe it's possible. Choosing to believe in the face of uncertainty is the essence of faith. In confronting such overwhelming odds, this is the kind of faith that will allow us to continue even when things look hopeless. And we must continue this struggle as long as we have breath, because to surrender again is to abandon everyone we love. Now, as improbable as it may sound, I firmly believe that ending war is possible, or I wouldn't be bringing this up. It's as simple as this. If enough people reject the self-fulfilling prophecy that war is inevitable, it will become unthinkable, if we have the courage to make it so. I choose to believe that the love that binds us to each other also connects us to all that is. Just as electrical energy flows when you flip a switch, in loving others, we complete the circuit of love that connects us collectively to all that is. May that provide us with the power we need to succeed in this hour of humanity's greatest need. May we find universal love in time to save ourselves, and may it provide the power we need to overcome the love of power. Thank you.
We'll do a meditation and then we'll have a question and answer.
Okay. Oh,
Great. All right, we'll take a few minutes of meditation time to sit with the thoughts that have been shared, and then we'll